Do you want to close the door?
Well, I need to do my life today, man. I have to walk around and shit. You want to hold him? Does that make him more quiet for you?
No, I just don't want to be anxious and have you listening to me and stuff.
Honey, I like listening. I'm just gonna get up and cook some breakfast for myself.
You like listening to me?
I mean, I learned shit, so.
What's the thing you learned?
Well. Learned a lot about the Medici family.
You already knew about the Medici family.
I know that you're putting me on the spot. Yeah, I'm doing that TikTok audio that's like, come on, brain, think of things. Come on, brain. That's what I'm doing. You're putting me on the spot.
This is about to end up in this video. You know that, right?
That's fine, but don't put me on the spot.
All right, I love you.
I wasn't allowed to take AP Euro.
You weren't allowed to take AP
No.
Euro. Why not?
Because you had to have an A in all of your history classes, and you had to have been taking honors history for 3 years.
So you missed out on AP Euro. That's why you want to always go to Europe with me.
Well, sure.
Wow.
I mean, that's why I like having you as a tour guide, because I get to learn all the things that I never got to learn in Harkin.
I love you.
I love you too.
Welcome back, AP. All right, welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flip where we're talking about scientific thought in the late 1800s, and we're getting into some stuff like that. Now, my wife actually might have some really interesting opinions on the guy that we talked about in class, Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freud.
Super big
Well,
weirdo.
he's also super problematic.
Oh, he's very problematic. But, a lot of, the stuff that he came up with is still actively used in therapy.
Still really
Like guided therapy, psychotherapy, pharmacology and association of psychology, even though he just gave cocaine to everybody and thought that was going to be the effective thing.
He was, kind of an ass.
She didn't curse. My wife didn't curse.
Asinine about how he talked about women.
Yes, he was also very offensive to women. He actually, 9 times out of 10, almost always blamed the mother in the relationship, which makes it sound to me, Pierre, like maybe he had a bad relationship with his mom, right? So
it was very Disney.
Yes, and then also on top of everything else, we talked about the id, the ego, the superego, right? A thing that we didn't get to, we talked a little bit about the Oedipus complex, right? And the other little thing that we didn't get to was the idea of repression, right? So one of the big things about Freud is he did believe that repression was like the ultimate evil when it actually comes to the general understanding of repression and tamping down, the way that Mr. Terry deals with his emotions is the ultimate evil. It's just let's just bottle it all up and then I'll just explode on somebody unsuspecting one day. So the big thing about it though is his method for figuring out what you've been repressing, how you've been struggling with your id, your ego and all that stuff is this thing called free association of ideas. That's what we did with Katie Pertwee, where we're going to ask her a lot of questions. We're going to try and understand what everything really comes down to, her motivations, why she tells Mr. Pertwee everything that she learns in class, stuff like that, and hypnosis, right? Hypnosis was another really big method of his as well, which apparently, according to a lot of Freudian psychologists, even to this day, is a very, very effective method for actually being able to uninhibit the mind. Now, the hypnosis, though, is changing a lot as time goes on, and it's also beginning to have some pharmacological backing even in the modern era. But Freud really set a standard set a standard for psychotherapy and psychology going forward, right? Now, the other big ones that we're going to have are much more focused in science, right? So there's going to be a dramatic shift in thought on concerning how things work, right? Now, I don't know if y'all have gotten into it yet, but you will definitely learn about this with Mr. Vaillant quite a bit. You don't have to write these down. You will learn about these with Mr. Vaillant a lot when you get into physics, right? Because literally in physics, the idea of work is considered a force, just like joules and watts and other units of energy as well. So a big thing that's going to happen is the laws of thermodynamics are going to pop up, right? Thermodynamics including the one really, really big and prominent one. Maria, do you know the first law of thermodynamics? Wait, a little closer. Let's see. Pop quiz for the wife. Does she remember the first law of thermodynamics?
Okay, I was allowed to take honors physics. Is this the one that energy cannot be created or destroyed?
Yes, the conservation of energy. It would not be created. What's the second one?
Is this equal and opposite?
That's a Newtonian law of force.
Gravity one?
No, it's when a reaction happens, most of it's what?
Released into the sky.
Not released into the sky.
I don't know. I'm trying to read your hand.
The second law is the one that energy is converted into other forms. At most times when there's work or a reaction, a lot of it is converted into heat.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the second one. And then the third one is that entropy at...
No, I got this.
Go.
An object in motion tends to stay.
No, that's the other one when it has to do it. That's his laws on motion.
Oh!
So, like, you're talking about... Yeah, they're all different.
Thermodynamics
is like thermo. It's heat, dynamics, the dynamics of heat and everything like that.
This is why I wasn't taking AP physics.
This is also why she didn't take AP physics. All right, so now look, the biggest thing about it, though, is when we're looking at the laws of thermodynamics, you need to understand that they're called Newton's laws of thermodynamics, even though technically he didn't come up with any of them. But they're mostly based off of his laws of motion and off of his laws of energy, right? That's the one that my wife started saying, or Maria started saying, the ideas of like... an object in motion will stay in motion until acted upon by an outside force. That's a law of motion. Equal but opposite reaction, right? All that stuff. Those things were the basis of creating the laws of thermodynamics when it actually went into understanding the movement of functionality and actually like the entire understanding of how do these machines work? Where did the steam engine come from? Why does it work? Why does it make it possible for locomotives to just go... and like actually like move down a track and things like that. And also when it comes to actually creating new machines and engineering, the laws of thermodynamics are massively important. Now, thermodynamics is a branch of physics built on Newton's ideas, which investigates the relationship between heat and mechanical energy. Now, determined though that the world is governed by a strict set of rules. Now, the reason why these laws of thermodynamics are really important is because they lead to this next thing called the Second Industrial Revolution, in like coming off and piggybacking off these two guys, right? So the big thing about it, though, is if you take the laws of thermodynamics and you actually look at the thermodynamics that's happening in this, like, right now. Now, like, so if you take the laws of thermodynamics and you blend them with the ideas of Dmitri Mendeleev, who is the father of chemistry, who discovered the periodic laws and also created the very, very first periodic table. And he also even has an, he has an element named after him called Mendelevium. Now, like, so the big thing about it, though, is as a Russian chemist, he is going to be the very first one to take Lavoisier's work of trying to, like, discover the known elements, and then he tries to put them into periodic tabling, which includes weights and also includes, like, atomic weights, as well as symbols, and also, like, classifies them by transition metals, gas, solids, etc., etc., etc. Isn't that right? So now the thing about it, though, is, go ahead, this leads to the analysis of atomic weight and the bonds in chemistry. Chemistry, though, later on, after Dmitri Mendeleev, there we go, who is considered the father of modern-day chemistry, is going to be later subdivided into new branches, like organic chemistry, which my wife is obsessed with. So also the ideas of carbon compounds, how they affect the structure of life and things like that. But the most important thing about it is his periodic table is going to lead you to understand what substances are combustible, what substances can and cannot be combined with other substances, right? So it's going to give another leg up to this idea of thermodynamics when it comes to reactions and also that conversion of heat, right? Endothermic versus exothermic reactions and things like that. So it's going to dramatically affect the progression of scientific thought, right? Now, the next guy is, or also, though, speaking of like those scientific thoughts, right off the heels of Mendeleev's understanding of the growth of like organic compounds and also chemistry, it's going to lead to the growing brand of chemical engineering as well. This right here, Bayer, is actually a pharmaceutical company that's going to be founded in southern Germany, named after the area that it's in, Bayern, which actually means Munich or Bavaria, right? So like now Bayer is going to be the very first group that invents aspirin. And aspirin is actually going to be synthesized from the bark of a tree after its chemical compounds are figured out, and that's going to be also invented in the late 1800s, right? So Mendeleev has massive impacts on the progression of society as well as businesses, okay? And so then you got Michael Faraday. Now, Michael Faraday might be one of the most important people on the planet, even though he's not very well known. He's an English scientist that basically creates the idea of generating electricity, right? So now, Michael Faraday is the very first person that discovers the base laws of electromagnetism, right? So the thing about it that most of you don't understand, the power that's running your Chromebook right now, the power that turns your lights on and off, the power that does anything is generated from a thing called what he referred to as a dynamo, right? So like now, what Michael Faraday realized is that you can generate electricity using magnets and copper wiring or a type of like element that has loose bonds on the outside to allow the flow of electrons, right? Because that's all electricity is, the movement of electrons, right? Free moving electrons bouncing from one atom to another and then bumping other ones off. That movement is known as electricity. Hence why, for example, that exact thing happens in clouds and when it strikes the planet whenever that energy is released, right? So the thing about it is that movement or that burst of electrons can be generated. And he does this by taking a magnet, and surrounding it by copper wiring and spinning it, right? So by spinning it, you can actually create and generate your own electricity. So he basically creates the idea that would be then later on producing coal-burning power plants. Thomas Edison doesn't invent a light bulb without Michael Faraday. Nikola Tesla does not come up with a Tesla coil or alternating current without Michael Faraday, right? These ideas are going to massively set forward a lot of different things in industry when it comes to electricity, the use of trolley cars, public transportation, all kinds of stuff. Now take the ideas of Mendeleev, Faraday, and the laws of thermodynamics, and it's going to lead to the second industrial revolution, right? Now, some of you are like, oh, God, another industrial revolution. I just took a quiz on that, and I didn't do as good as I wanted to. Remember, the first one is the dramatic one. The first one is one that takes like a week to go over. The second one is one that we can go over in like 5 seconds, right? Because it's just improving upon the things that had already happened, right? So the burst in industrial creativity from Mendeleev, from Faraday, from the laws of thermodynamics are going to lead people to be like, wait, so if I take these two combustible items, put them together, add a heat source, that's going to generate a chemical reaction, right? That chemical energy can then be harnessed into a mechanical movement. I can use those joules and push something, right? So like the thing about it is now we're moving in the direction of a massive burst of creativity, right? And technological innovation going into the end of the 1800s, okay? So you're going to have smaller interchangeable parts on machines. You're going to have the processing of rubber is going to be a really, really big one later on. Keep that in the back of your mind, okay? Just be like, remember that rubber is going to become a very, very important natural resource going into the end of the late 1800s, right? So like, I expect all of you to be able to spit that out to me whenever I see you during your warm-up when we're all focusing and doing what we're supposed to be doing because we are still hustling and we are not slowing down, right? Just like the industrial revolutions, we're going to keep pushing forward, right? So the thing about it is, remember that rubber is going to be a very important natural resource when it comes to the processing and everything else during the late 1800s, all right? So like you know, like the scene from, with like Wizard of Oz, this one?
Hereby confer upon you the honorary degree of THD.
THD?
That's Doctor of Thinkology.
The sum of the square roots of any two sides of an isosceles triangle is equal to the square root of the remaining side. Oh, joy! Rapture! I've got a brain!
That's how well I expect you to know that rubber is very important in the late 1800s, right? Because it's actually going to lead to a lot of imperialistic activity, especially in Africa. Now, so going forward also, the creation of fertilizer, using chemical compounds to actually create nutrient-rich and dense food for plants. So, also petroleum distillation and processing, which is going to lead to an absolute nightmare when people realize that, oh, wait, I can take crude oil out of the ground and I can distill it and make gasoline out of it? And then the entire world's going to do, well, let me rephrase, the entire underdeveloped world that lives on top of all this oil is going to collectively get together and do this.
No! Chucky!
Exactly, right? So that's another big one. Maritime technology, like iron steamboats are going to come up. They're going to be very important. One very famous one is Frederick Wilhelm de Grosse, the Frederick the Great steamboat, right? And then also the Bessemer process in the production of steel, right? That the Germans are going to come up with. Now, we'll talk particularly about these two guys when we get into the unification of Germany, because literally Germany actually set the standard for the Second Industrial Revolution and kind of burst forward and literally got real close to Great Britain and almost passed them at one point, and then World War I happened. I wonder why. Now, looking at the entire thing, though, this picture is a great example of the Second Industrial Revolution. You're taking the ideas of George Stephenson's rocket from 1830, and you're just making it much better and much more efficient, right? We're using the concepts of thermodynamics from coal-burning steam power, and we're actually making it into a much more efficient train that's not going to break or break down nearly as often, right? Steamboats are going to be really big, and then you're going to see slowly horses and cars begin to fade away, and going into the early 1900s when we get into World War I, you're going to start seeing cars pop up. Not horses and carts. I think I just might have said horses and cars. Horses and carts, not horses and carts. You're going to start seeing automobiles pop up, right? Which, again, rubber, going to be very, very important for those tires going on those cars. Keep that in the back of your mind, right? Rubber is a very important natural resource going into the end of the late 1800s, right? So now, also, you're going to see the growth of social sciences pop up. Now that people are, again, living on top of each other, we've got nice new cities due to Houseman reforms, and there's not duty in the streets. Thank you, Edwin Chadwick and Jeremy Bentham, even though Jeremy Jerkyhead is going to, of course, live with all of us for forever. So now you're going to see all these new things happen, and so you're going to see the growth of some very important sciences pop up as well. Those being the social sciences and evolution. Now, why am I talking about social sciences and evolution on the same slide at the same time? Because these feel like very, very different things. What does Darwin have to do with society, right? Well, the problem is what his ideas are going to be then replicated, messed up, and messed around with, right? So, first and foremost, in your notes right now, just go ahead and write down Darwin, ? Right? When we're talking about Charles Darwin. And give me 3 little empty slots, because I am not talking about this on a flip, because it's too much to explain, okay? But basically, in a nutshell, Darwin, do background, do breakthrough, and then do impact on society, right? So we're going to talk about him in 3 different key things, because his ideas are going to dramatically impact society on a very aggressive level. And y'all should already know a lot about Charles Darwin from your science courses and from biology with Miss Merrill, right? So now, also looking at this though, you got to understand it's going to dramatically affect the way that people view one another, which is going to be a huge problem, but we're going to get into that, like I said, during class, right? Because it's a very important conversation we need to have going into the late 1800s when imperialism begins to pop up. I think some of y'all see what's on the horizon, but if you don't, let me guide you through it, okay? Because I don't want to take something so important that might pop up on a short answer question or on an LEQ and kind of just play around with it, right? Now, look at the big thing though also, take the objective ideas of science, you can apply them to society. We're now going to also see the massive collection of data, right? So you're seeing as of the 1850s, now that Chadwick has done his reforms, John Snow has done his reforms, Pasteur is now limiting the rates of death and things like that. Do you remember that graph that we actually looked at, which was a really, really good graph to actually use when we're understanding this whole thing? Where'd it go? Whoa, what is going on? All right, there we go. Oh, wait, look at these percentages, right? 17% in 1801, 35, 54. The collection of data has grown massively when we're getting into the late 1800s, right? Cities are beginning to take actually accurate censuses. Certificates of death are beginning to be issued. Burials are beginning to be get track of on a very intrinsic level, right? So we're actually seeing social sciences burst forward because we now have the ability to actually look back at that data and make hypotheses and actually do experiments to figure out what's going on in society and what has led to these different things, right? So we're now getting rates of data on crime, children, rate of death at birth, rate of death or rate of life after birth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is going to affect a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But one of the biggest ones is Auguste Comte, right? So, who is a French social philosopher. Very interesting figure, too. And I know some of us in the room are actually fans of French philosophy, McKenna, right? So Auguste Comte is a very, very cool person to study because he had a lot of intrinsic ideas in the late 1800s that would set the foundation for a lot of other philosophy going forward, right? Now, his ideas mostly had to do with a lot of things associated with his background, right? So first of all, for you to understand Auguste Comte on a very, very personal level, Auguste Comte is a socialist, okay? He's a very, very intense socialist who had bouts of mental illness his entire life, right? Now, it's important to understand a couple of things about him when you're talking about his background in general. When he was a young man, he was actually raised in southern France, right? Now, he started coming up with ideas on republicanism and socialism and these things, and his family wasn't too keen on it, so he basically had to leave his family behind in the south of France, and he moves to Paris, right? Now, he moves to Paris after the Napoleonic reign ends finally in 1815, and he begins to buddy up and become the secretary and close confidant of Henri de Saint-Simon, one of our other original socialists. Auguste Comte begins to listen to his ideas, the ideas of redistribution and understanding the parasites and the doers of society, and he really keyed in on the parasites aspect, particularly in correlation with the growth of science being a doer and a parasite being those of lawyers, priests, and other people like that. So what's going to happen though going forward is that he has a falling out with Henri Saint-Simon. They disagree on some things. He breaks away and he begins to do a lot of his own writings. He also falls in love with a married woman. They never actually apparently like physically are together. He just falls in love with her madly, and she refuses to leave her husband, and then she unfortunately dies all of a sudden. This sends him into a very, very large bout of very unhealthy mental states. He tries to commit suicide at one point by trying to jump off a bridge, and he also ends up in a medical hospital in an asylum like multiple different times, right? But Auguste Comte emerged from all these things with a very different intrinsic view of society, a very intense one, where he created this concept called the positivist method, right? He said that the only valid information that is information that can be attained through science. So he takes the ideas of Voltaire and he expands upon them. And he starts going along the lines of like, we have to stop being fanatics. We have to stop assuming things. We have to stop looking to old books of stories and trying to figure out what the heck is going on in society. Because those things do not necessarily apply. The only thing you can figure out for sure, or be positive about is using the positivist method. And he believed then that society learned on a certain scale, right? He said that society learns on a very weird scale in the terms of you are the theologic one first. He says that the earliest form of thinking is always religion-based, that we use things like Greek myths, or the Greeks did that to actually try and understand why does the sun set and rise, right? You then get into the metaphysical phase where you have abstract, unprovable stuff where you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure that the sun rises and sets because we're going around it and the earth is also turning. But then you hit eventually the societal scientific phase, which is understandable and positive because you've measured it and you've observed it and you've actually got data that shows that it's the answer to your issue, right? He then said, though, that by the late 1800s, that society had finally entered, especially that society of Europe, has entered into the scientific phase, that we need to get away from like religion and things like that. So he had some very aggressive thoughts on religion. He believed that like religion was only suited for people who were fanatics, of low education, and people on their deathbeds, right? So like that's the only people he thought that ever really cared about religion or really, really truly used it. And now the interesting concept about this as well is he's also alive during a time when church attendance is going down, right? So there's a chance that he's also kind of just mirroring the societal implications of what's going on at the time. But then a lot of people begin to question him. They're like, oh, so you're an atheist. And Auguste Comte says, yes, I am. And then like what ends up happening, though, in the long run is that people say, well, what about all the things that religion has provided society? For example, marriage, the procreation of families and things like that. And also regulation of those marriage. And Auguste Comte then had to take a step back. And he was like, I did love my married girlfriend that I thought was like super, super awesome. I can't remember what her name is. I'll have to look it up. Now, extra credit. Whoever comes to my class first and tells me the name of Auguste Comte's married girlfriend, I'll give you an extra credit point on that last test. Now, so what ends up happening, though, okay, he has a lot of extreme thoughts on marriage in the sense of marriage is important to the growth of society because it is important for the growth of children and things like that. And without religion to regulate the moral code, what are we going to be left with? Just people married that are just basically worshiping money instead of worshiping a faith. And so he ends up having, like, this idea on, well, things like marriage are really bad without religion, so should we have a religion as a society? And then Auguste Comte comes up with the religion of atheism or the religion of secularism, right? And so he actually created this entire religion based around the idea of dedicating every single month to a certain type of study and understanding, for example, agriculture or art or science or like engineering or something like that. And then every single day would be a time that you actually teach people about certain important historical figures. In a lot of ways, it's like kind of like the way that we use like certain months for awareness, right? So like, for example, like October being Breast Cancer Month, February being Black History Month. He took it to a full length, though, and actually went way, way further with it and used it to be like, oh, we'll take all the old churches and we'll convert them into secular religious body places and stuff like that. Later on, he would get ripped apart by both atheists and religious societies and things like that. But his Auguste Comte's ideas are really, really important because he actually really kind of probed the inner workings of religion and how they have been used for so long to actually answer major questions in society that they actually don't necessarily have the answers to. So now going into it, we are now leaving scientific thought and theory behind, and we're now moving into nationalism and imperialism. So nationalism and imperialism are going to be two major movements that actually occur in the late 1800s going into the early 1900s. Now, nationalism is going to mostly characterize the unification of a lot of different countries and also the growth of several other ones. So nationalism, as we know, we talked about it earlier in our last unit. Nationalism is the idea that every single culture, group, and genus of people has like a genius about them. They have like ideas that they believe in and all this other stuff. So the thing about it that they believe that like German culture, and that was inspired by Napoleon, and y'all's ability as a class to understand that concept really well really blows me away every time I think about it, because y'all are like 2 steps ahead, and I love it. Keep up the good work in that, like, understanding common sense. Take down the bad work of, like, being goofy every 5 seconds, even though I know y'all are really burnt out. And we're getting there, though. We just got to keep working hard, right? So now, getting into it, though, imperialism is going to be another major thing as well. Now, imperialism, I'm not going to talk about right now, mainly just due to the fact that it's something that's very important to the progression of the rest of the world and how Europeans began to impact people in a very negative way later on, right? Now, getting into it, though, we're starting off with nationalism. And in the late 1800s, following the revolutions of 1848, nationalism is going to take a dramatic burst forward, right? And a lot of different reasons. Like, for example, you had success. You had the springtime of the peoples. You had the rolling back of the reforms. You had the June days when the middle-class army shot like a bunch of socialists and lower-class people in the streets of France following the revolutions of 1848. Now, the thing about it, though, is nationalism can be appealing to both liberalism but not to, or like, okay, this is where it gets really, really weird, okay? Nationalism is a fluid concept, okay? If you're in a landlocked country like France, okay, people like the guy that Napoleon III hated, which we're about to talk about here in a second, named Adolphe Thiers, might really love the concept of nationalism because it led France to being able to take over other people. Now, liberals, though, on the other hand, view it as, why are we taking over other people when we should focus on our own culture, right? So it can be a very radical concept. It can be a very liberating concept. It's just one of those things that you need to understand, that everyone can twist nationalism on their own to kind of suit their needs, if you understand what I'm getting at, right? So, like, it's weird, it's hard to understand, but it's going to be fine because we're going to figure this out, okay? Now, look, so when we start talking about nationalism, we always start off with France, okay? So we start talking about France because we're mainly talking about the reign of this guy, right? Napoleon III. What a guy. Now, let's give a little bit of background to Napoleon III, because I feel like I don't know Napoleon III well enough, okay? So Napoleon III is a very important figure. He is the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, that's something you already know, but how close of a nephew? Are we talking about distant nephew? Are we talking about nephew because it was related to one of his sisters, etc., etc.? No, Napoleon III is very important because of his earlier marriage, right? Now, we know that Napoleon Bonaparte was married to 2 different women, right? Napoleon Bonaparte was married to Josephine, all right? So, and he was also married to Marie, which was a Habsburg princess, right? So Marie is the one that gives him a son. Now, Napoleon II, though, dies of tuberculosis at the age of 21 in Austria. Napoleon III, on the other hand, is actually the son of Napoleon's brother, Napoleon Bonaparte's brother, Louis Napoleon, and Josephine's daughter from an earlier marriage. Do y'all remember when I told you about that? That, like, this is an example of how Napoleon's views of women were really messed up because, like, he took his stepdaughter, who was very young, and forced her to marry his much older brother, right? So, like, now, the big thing about it, though, is that's going to lead to this offspring, right? And also a brother as well, which is going to be important later on. But Napoleon III, or Louis Napoleon, as we'll call him, Napoleon Bonaparte, this guy right here, grew up in a very, very kind of torn household. His mother and father did not like each other at all. His father was the first king of the Netherlands since ever, since Philip II, right? So in the major long run of things, he really didn't like living under his father, so they didn't live there for very long. They eventually, after the fall of the Napoleonic Empire, run away to Italy. He lives in Italy for quite some time, and at the age of 15 in Italy, it's where he begins to discover one of his major passions in life, women. Now, he also begins to study his other passion in life, studying, particularly politics, right? And so one of the biggest things about Napoleon III before we get anywhere is you need to understand he's not like his uncle. His uncle was tone deaf when it came to political rights for people in certain ways, right? Because he got rid of rights for women, brought back slavery and things like that. Napoleon III This guy is going to be much more like adept at being a modern politician, right? Trying to keep everyone happy kind of politician. He's going to live in Italy for quite some time while he's studying all these things, but he never reads enough books on being a military leader. He's not a very good military leader, even though he's dressed in military outfitting, as you can see. He ends up bouncing around all these other different European countries. He actually lives in New York City for a little while. He almost causes a war between France and Switzerland because he actually tried to overthrow the French government twice and failed twice and was made fun of in the French newspapers a lot, right? So, like, now, the thing about it, though, is he never came back until 1848 because he realized that 1848 was going to be his opportunity, right? So the thing about it is he actually progresses French politics forward dramatically, and he shows up whenever France is on the doorstep of converting itself into the Second Republic. Now, we talked about this already, right? So, like, the progression of French politics goes like this, okay? Write these down if you just want to have them in the back of your mind. It goes the French absolute monarchy, then it goes the French First Republic, French First Empire, Restoration France, French Second Republic, French Second Empire, French Third Republic, French Fourth Republic, French Fifth Republic, okay? So now, in the long run, he is going to enter in during the Second Republic and the Second Empire phase, okay? So, like, he's going to show up then. And also, why this guy? Why Napoleon III? The guy that got made fun of in the newspapers. The guy that, like, actually was just, like, all about all these women. He had a sugar mama from England, like, apparently this really, really rich woman that, like, liked him a lot, and he, like, used her a lot for her money and stuff. He was obsessed with... Are you interested in Napoleon III having a sugar mama? Like...
I'm just kind of curious, how did a woman have that much money?
Oh, she was a widower. Like, so, a widower to a very, very wealthy estate. Now, he was, used her as his sugar mama, but then also slept with actresses all the time.
Wow.
Napoleon III is a very intense figure, right? But why him, though? A lot of it has to do with his name recognition. His name carried clout with him for a long, long time. At one point, when he was living in France with his mom, and like 10 years after the fall of the Napoleonic Empire happened on May 5th, which was the Battle of Waterloo, mourners of the Napoleonic Empire arrived out front of his house and stood there for days on end, being like, "We're with you, we miss Napoleon too." Talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, not Napoleon III. So the thing about it is his name does carry a ton of clout, right? Now, what about his platform? Whose side is he on? Napoleon III is really important because he's basically this politician that kind of figures out how to keep his enemies close, keep his friends close, keep everybody close. He's a modern politician in the sense of he only wants to make everyone happy to a fault, right? So Napoleon III is going to be in power from 1848 to 1870. Now, why was Napoleon elected in France during the Second Republic? What ends up happening is after the June Days were when the middle-class army suppressed remember the picture of like the barricades I showed you, the actual like picture of the cobblestones in the streets and stuff like that. So the June Days is when, following the middle class, then siding back with the conservatives, they shot all the lower class people in the streets. Now, after this, they decided that the Second Republic decided to have a strong executive, and they wanted to elect a president, right? And Napoleon was elected in a massive landslide. He actually got 74% of the vote. Reasons why? His uncle. Second reason, a massive fear of socialism and Marxism is growing. And 3, popular programs in pamphlet form, right? So, like, very, very good guy in, like, the sense that he knows how to get to people, right? So he actually appealed a lot to the countrysides of France, as you can see very particularly. So if you look at this map of France, this is the voting districts. The lighter the green means that he won that area, but it means he didn't win it aggressively, okay? So if you look at the lighter green areas, this being Paris, and this being actually the Burgundy region, and also these being some other, like, La Rochelle as well, and Marseille down here, the urban centers didn't vote for him as dramatically as the rural centers did. The rural centers voted for Napoleon aggressively because of who he was. And he was able to actually carry some like actual emphasis in those urban cities, mainly because of his pamphlet programs. This right here is his pamphlet that was printed in a lot of newspapers, and this is, I know, one of those things that Annabelle is going to geek out about because it's all in French, but what it means is the extinction of pauperism. So he actually released a pamphlet on his ideas of how he was going to eradicate poverty, right? He also had a lot of different political ads that went out. This actually showing the guy that he's going to be running against. He actually ran against this guy named Cavaignac, right? So, like, and Cavaignac was the general who led the middle-class armies against the socialists during the June Days and had them all shot, right? So that was the guy that he was running against. It's it's not going to be that hard to beat that guy, right? So, like, now, he had high hopes. Everyone had high hopes for him, being a strong moderate like Bonaparte and someone who advocates for all people, right? Because remember Napoleon? If you jump down to the bottom in the description, I'm going to attach a video, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Napoleon Bonaparte was an expert at being both liberal and conservative, about like making the rich happy and trying to make poor people happy, right? So he was going to try to do France like his uncle did, right? He was going to try and play the line in the middle and figure out a way to make it so he had a lot of support, right? He wanted to advocate for every single class, but the biggest thing he had to do was placate a very, very conservative legislative branch, led by this guy named Adolphe Thiers, right? So now, or Adolphe Thiers. Now, so like basically spelled Adolphethiers, was the guy leading this conservative legislative branch known as the Constituent Assembly, right? So now he increased the role of the Catholic Church in education to try and like basically suck up to the conservatives. He also allowed Adolphe Thiers to take some voting rights away and create some very, very intense landowning and like regulations on who could vote. So after being elected president, he allowed a guy to actually pass regulations limiting the rights of people to vote. Why would he do this? So he could get support from these conservatives to prevent another uprising and prevent another flipping over, right? Now, the assembly, though, he also wanted to do this so he could have it rewritten, because in the original Constitution of the Second Republic, it said that their president could only serve for 2 years and 1 term at a time, and then they would actually elect somebody else, right? Now, Napoleon wanted a 2nd term, though, and then he was expecting that they would give it to him so he could then go and do some of his ideas on extinguishing pauperism. But they didn't. Adolphe Thiers refused to pass this, and actually the majority voted not to give him another term. So he decides to throw a coup, right? Just like his uncle Napoleon Bonaparte, he throws a coup, and he overthrows the French military in 1852. Some middle-class rebels and protests broke out, which are gonna push Napoleon to re-grant universal suffrage. And this time, because he did this, 92% of the people elected him president for 10 years, and a year later, 97% of them elected him as Emperor of France, right? And we're going to enter into the French Second Empire. And we're going to pick up right here because we have a lot of dense stuff to talk about when we get into class. So come ready. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.